Alright, so people have been asking me to make a tutorial for an MLP style character. Hopefully this tutorial will cover that. I will start this by saying this is not for beginners. If you already know how to use Blender, then you should be fine. If you do not know how to use Blender, then you need to go learn that first, because I'm not going to teach you how to use Blender. I'm just teaching you a way that I would do My Little Pony characters. First we got to do is scale up our main cartoon reference up. Understand that I will be using my own style. This is more of a guide, not a direct reference for the character, but I'll use this as a way to show you how I do stuff. And yes, I will credit this person in the description. Oh, that's not what I want. I want to go here. Now you're going to want to move these into where the approximate center is. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be roughly in this location. The purpose is to make this a uniform type of thing. At this point, you want to enable the clicking, selecting thing and disable that so you don't accidentally click the references. Now they're where you want them. Edit mode and subdivide, and make sure this is smooth. You're gonna want to rotate this to where it lines up. You'll see there's an invisible line between the nose and the ear. You want to connect those lines. You also want to make this big enough to where it works. Now remember, the pony's body is a bean shape. Doesn't matter if it's a realistic pony or if it's a cartoon pony, it's a bean shape. Normally, ponies don't have this jutting neck thing. I don't know what that is, but we're not adding that. We're going to ignore it. Also, try to make sure that your body is set up right. Don't forget to open a second window so that you can have a front view, because this is what you're going to want. Additionally, one thing we should do, because we need to do this before we continue, is ensure that both references are in the center. Don't forget to save. Then continue working on the rest of it as you would normally. The easiest is just to extrude. And remember, make this as simple and as straightforward as possible. Add in another object. This will be your mouth reference. You want this to be the right size. The default size of 2 meters seems to be the accurate size. Just position it where it needs to go. Use proportional editing and shape it to as close to the right shape as necessary. And again, this does not need to be symmetrical. Just bias towards the side that you prefer to work with, because again, it'll be mirrored later. There, we have our simple mouth shape set up. Unhide your cube, because I hid mine. Then go to your thing, select all the lines, bevel it out, but remember, don't make the bevel too wide. You want it at about there with 2 segments. And if you want to round it up to the nearest hundredths, feel free to do that. If the jump seems too big, don't worry, it's fine. And do the mirror modifier right now. Don't forget to click clipping so that you can fix any issues with that. You might want to hide the icosphere because now it's going to be in the way. And you're going to want to select all the lines again and then scale X to 0. At this point, all the edges should snap together. If they don't, just move it around the X a little bit and it'll snap together. Because you have clipping turned on, it'll just stop it from going beyond. At this point, I recommend you apply the mirror modifier. Be sure to exit edit mode first. Save your scene. Then move stuff around until it works. So like for example, there's where the lips are. Put this below that. Grab this. Move it to up there. Do your best to sort of make it make sense. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to make sense. Now you'll notice that some of the lines don't seem to accurately intersect. It's because it's still low poly. Don't worry about that. Give this 2 lines. You're going to want to have like this, but I recommend doing one first, moving it up to where about the nose needs to be, doing another one, and putting that roughly where the mouth needs to be. Then you can move there's 2 ways to do this. I recommend grabbing these two vertices and moving them forward so that they match. And if you want to know how big the mouth should be, just kind of move stuff around until it makes sense. Again, this is pretty much all it is. Though I recommend putting a loop cut here and just grabbing all of those and beveling them out like this. You'll then have yourself one of these. To clean up the topology, subdivide this on both sides. Then connect these two dots here and here on both sides. This will result in having quads. And again, I recommend looking up references. Just find any generic horse image, preferably one that's closer in shape to the character you have in mind, and also with a bit of dynamic look and movement, something like this or like this, so you can make out the shapes of the legs or the thighs or whatever, you know. Bones. This doesn't count because he's hidden under all that clothes, although he is handsome. The style of character that I'm going to be making is going to be similar to this. Not quite the same, but similar. You know you want it. Give them legs. Technically, we want to select all this. I want to do this. Shrink it down just a teeny bit. And then there we go. That forms our hip base. If you want this to be rounder, like the reference, which you do, because I'm noticing it's not as round as I want it to be, not as voluptuous. So we want to grab these lines here, move them back a bit, select the entire line, bevel it. 2 or 3 segments should be fine. 1 is not enough. 2 is about right. And if you want it to be a flat number, we have to do the mirror thing again. This time you want to delete vertices. Make sure that the center is in the center, nice and flat like that. This time you can just hide the references right now, but you don't have to. I'm gonna leave mine, but you don't want them rendering. And looking at this side, we want to pull this out a little bit. And we're gonna want to give one more loop cut to the center there so that she'll have a bit more definition. You go to sculpt mode and you want to click smooth. Make it bigger, but not super big. Press the N key to open up the tool panel. Click the tool panel because it's not there by default for some reason. Lower the strength to below 200 if you're using mouse. If you're using a touch screen like Wacom 1 or whatever, good for you. This is why you want the mirror modifier, because then you can just sort of work with everything and have it just work. Then you want to smooth out some areas. Other areas don't need as much smoothing, but right here is going to need a little bit. Switch to solid view in one of these so that you can see the things better. If you want to see the references while in solid view, just click text view and then you can see everything. If you want to make sure you're not doing too narrow on the nose, just have the icosphere in view. Use the inflate tool as necessary. This will allow for better shaping of the butt, among other areas. Sculpt, mirror, inflate, and just make sure overall that it pretty much works. Try your best to make sure that the reference fits the scale and stuff that you're working with. Delete this here. All right, don't be afraid to extrude outward and downward. The reason why I'm doing this is because I realized her legs are too short. Merge these bits at their centers. And now your legs should be looking pretty good. You'll notice that it no longer is symmetrical, which is fine. Press J to connect any loops. And if you're uncertain about the normal maps, just kind of look around like this. And your legs are looking good. And this is where things get a little spicy. Just kind of move this up like this. Because believe it or not, horses have butts. What you want to do is make sure that it works. See, look, now we have a butt. That their legs should be like this. Then we go down and out, shrink down just a little bit. Technically, you can get the same with pressing the I key, but I find this way is a little more stable because it doesn't result in weird deformities with the interior faces. Now that you've got that, going to want to extrude down again. Actually, wait, Control Z, shrink down again. This time, we want to make sure that we just have these selected. Then extrude down till we're at the bottom. Scale the Z to 0. Make sure it's between the two hooves, because that's important. Make it bigger. And your rear legs are pretty much done in terms of the simple shapes. Just shape it like a hoof. Grab the individual points and just move them around. Then just add a point here, like this. Shrink it down a little bit, move it around. Then just Control B, bevel it, give it this many, and like this. What you really want to do is pretty much make sure that the topology is pretty even all around. We can fix some of that by sculpting and smoothing it out. But we now have a relatively decent pony legs. Then what we want to do is we want to grab the bottom. This time we press I instead of E. And we go down, out, select these ones, I again, and up again. This will provide a simplified hoof shape. Now it looks a little ugly, but that's fine. Don't worry about that right now. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go to sculpt mode, smooth, and we're just gonna kind of smooth out the back here. Something like this. Do the same here. We're gonna lower this down a little bit. Turn off the viewport for the reference. Now don't be afraid to pull these forward because you want their legs to look gorgeous and nice. So don't be afraid to exaggerate a little bit. Now we take the front legs and do the same thing. You'll notice they have less detail than the rear legs. That's fine. We're going to want to essentially extrude them down again. Now if you want to make sure that there is no hairs in the wrong spot, you're going to want to add one more loop here like this, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. Then what you're going to want to do is essentially select the hooves just by themselves, make sure they're all selected, extrude outwards like this, and select individual origins and grow them just a little bit using proportional editing. And if you want them to look a little more rounded, simply just select these lines, move them up. And if you want to make it look a little more realistic, I guess, just select the rear section, move them down. Try to round out some areas if you can. Don't worry about messing up the hooves. You can correct them later if you want. But essentially, you want round, because horse hooves are actually more round than they are long like this. I mainly did them this way because it was easier. Alright, now onto the face, which is arguably going to be a little tricky. But there's something I need to discuss first about the face. You'll notice I loaded up earlier this Judy Hopps model specifically for this purpose. Now if we go here, you'll notice that there's the eyelid, and then there's this part here, meets up like that. And there's another one for down here, but that's a little less important. But this is sort of what I'm talking about. And the eyebrow itself, I'm exaggerating for the sake of this, but it's sort of like this. I don't remember the words to describe what I'm talking about. I just know that it's a thing that I'm aware of. Add a UV sphere, center in. Use the mirror modifier, move it aside, rotate on the x-axis, 90 degrees as required. We're gonna make the final eye material and eye object, which means we need to go to shader editor and we need to go here. Then go to any textures you have. If you get the Judy Hopps model, you'll get this texture, so don't worry. Okay, so you're gonna wanna get your eye texture. You can get it from the Judy Hopps folder. Make sure to unwrap it. The sphere, I mean, unwrap the sphere. To do that, you just wanna make a T. So go up, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright, search for the context and then just mark seam. Technically the shortcut's Control E, but I'm lazy, so whatever. Alright, go to unwrap. You'll notice the eye changes shape. It's good, it's what you want. Now you're going to want to look at references. So you're going to want to make sure the eyes look like this, because if they don't, it might look weird. Basically, the same thing as Judy Hopps eyes herself. Here, UV editor, select it, and just move stuff around until it makes sense. What you're going to want to do is sort of just grow it all out and not allow for overlapping. Something like that. There we go. Connect the dots. Now move it into the approximate position. If you're unsure of how big it needs to be, don't worry. Simply enable your front-facing reference. Disable the cube view initially. Go to the front view, and scale appropriately. Something like there is actually close enough. And then you're going to want to move them into the head, approximately to where they need to go. Now if you keep them spherical like this, it can help encourage realism, so you might want to actually shrink them down a little bit. Turn on the gizmo, so you got full control of rotation. Move them around until they make sense. That's close enough. Go here, edit mode, and just simply select areas that you want. I personally recommend something like this. Before you do this part, you're going to want to make sure these shapes are in the right spot. So move this, kinda shape it to where it's what you want. You can correct later for more advanced freedom, but essentially get it to where you want. And you want to end set like this. This is what you want right here. Essentially, you're gonna want to move this stuff around. Try for an almond shape eye, like literally, you know, almond shape. Aim for something like that, because pretty much all of them have some variation of this same shape. The same almond eye shape with varying degrees of corner sharpness, but you pretty much want to aim for that almond shape. The rest of the stuff comes later. Delete. Use proportional editing. It'll make this whole thing a lot easier. Move stuff around to where it makes sense. Again, as I said before, don't have to grab both parts of the thing, just make it work. And remember what I said about these shapes. Try to keep that in your mind a little bit while you're working on this. I know it looks a little haunting, but don't worry, it will look better. In fact, I think in the beginning of this video, I'll probably show what the final looks like. What I do know I need is to move this whole area up like this. Then we just kind of move this forward a little bit. Reason being is eyebrows. This pony gonna need eyebrows. Don't forget to just double check where everything is and make sure that, again, it makes sense in its 3D space. If you don't have an intuition for this, I can't help you. You gotta figure it out. If you want it to look less dead, don't be afraid to just move the eyes around. There. Now it looks sentient. And then just shade it smooth just so it looks a little less jank. There's two ways to do this. You can click these three and do it like this. Have an actual horse nose. If you're unsure, you can just double check on the characters, or you can go horse nose. Take a look at a few horse noses. See if you like any of them. If you don't, then do what you want, I guess. If you want a middle ground between realistic and that, you can just go like this and there, something like that. If you do something like this, it'll pretty much qualify as a realistic horse nose and any other bovine nose. If you want to do the simple ones, then just basically select the other way here and use this spot here, shrink it down a little bit, and then extrude inward. Same concept, and when you smooth it out, it looks like this. This does work, and it's what most people should kind of use, but I personally like the other way that I did before, which is this. This is the nose I'm going to be using. You can use your own nose. I'm using this nose. I like this nose. It's what I'm using. Now that you have the pony set up pretty much how you want it, the mouth and the ears come pretty much last. If you want to add genitals, you can do so now. Same thing with the tail. Let's just start with the tail. Ooh. Now, add a tail by inset faces and then pull out a little bit. Now you're going to want to smooth this out. Turn off the gizmo because you will end up grabbing it at some point and you'll hate yourself. Go back to edit mode. Now that you got your tail base, simply extrude out. This looks a little silly, so let's just go on the Y axis. Something about that long is actually accurate. Then simply shrink it down a little bit, make it a little wider, correct for any of the weird distortions that happened. In this case, try to make it look round. Add a few of these, and that's your tail. It doesn't need to be more complex than that. Now, horses' tails are technically shorter than this for the underlying mesh areas. If you want a shorter tail, then you're going to have to rely a little bit on physics more than you would on just movement. Technically, you can do so both ways. I'm going to keep the tail long. Now for the mouth. At this point, we need to grab the entire lips and simply extrude inward. pretty much along the same vector there. This time we shrink it down just a little bit. This part gets a little weird with the mouth because there are several ways to attack this. The best way is technically a little harder, but the results are typically better. What you're going to want to make sure of is that this has the right shapes to it. The initial part of the mouth needs to have a grounded approach. It doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be functional. And so then what you're going to want to do is just kind of extrude like you would normally and do it a few times just to give it some room to do whatever it needs to. The final extrude taking you to the back of the throat where you close the hole up and you just manually tell it where you want the faces to be. This point you're going to want to put another one of these here. This one you want to pull up a little bit like this because this will be the closer you are to matching the outside topology, the more reasonable it'll be when it tries to goes together. Now remember, the throat is a smaller hole than the mouth, so you're going to want to extrude accordingly. Right now we're going to deal with just having the short throat. It's not going to be hyper detailed right now. The important part is the ears. Open up the references that you have and find ones that help with ears. Specifically, find ones that help you understand the shape of the ears. If you still don't know the shape of the ears, look up references of other characters and essentially guess. That's all you have to do, is just guess. Guess as to how big it has to be and where they have to go. If we were to be more realistic, like we're aiming to be, you have complete liberty and freedom with how big or small you want your ears to be. Personally, I'm of the opinion that they need to be this big. So you're going to want to pull this part out a little bit because it looks weird. You're also going to want to make this smaller and extrude in, shrink down like that. Place the 3D cursor and rotate around 3D cursor using this like this and now, because adding another circle cut would result in too many polygons, what we're going to do is we're going to go bam, 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 bam. And we're going to just press the inset button, pull it out. We have the ears pretty much where they need to go. Now, to a degree, a mouth is just a tube. That's pretty much all it is. What you want to do now, grab the lips, bevel them out, somewhere like that. Make sure there is plenty of space between the points, specifically in contention areas like this area right here. Add a loop cut, just one for right now. This is for later. Grab this whole thing here, because this is where your uvula goes. Give it 2, just so that retopologizing is easier than before. Then you want to grab the interior areas and you want to shrink them down just a little bit. You want to grab this here and you want to just grow it out a little bit. Before we do that though, add another cube. Specifically, this will be the tongue, more or less. I recommend that you custom texture this tongue later. Right now, just shape it. Subdivide like you would the head. Give it this many. Scale it down, then just shrink it down. Make it look like it would fit about like this in the mouth. Then you move it forward. Then you go up here and you just extrude once. Why once? Because now you have full freedom over the whole tongue. Before you do that though, hide the other one so you can see what you're doing. Before you add in any ring cuts, loop cuts, or whatever, you're going to want to shape this tongue to look more like a tongue. You're going to want to type in horse tongue so you get a general idea of the shape of a horse tongue. Specifically, you want a high resolution photo of a horse tongue, and you want as many of these as you can. You can make out all the tiny details. It's great. Anyways, this also shows you that they have this middle cleft thingy in the center. Now that you've lowered that whole thing down, add in a few loop cuts. Now you have all your polygons for your tongue. It's a very simple shape really. It doesn't need to be complex. Now what you want to do is essentially, horses and cows are very simple and they're very similar. Try to find images that show the definition of the shape. It's really tricky to find good ones because people don't always know how to take good pictures. That's okay. Try to find good pictures. Yeah, this one's good. It shows you the shape. This is what you want. You want to copy this as best as you can. The reason why I'm doing it this way is because we're going to sculpt it a little bit. Try to make it look like that. Your favorite tool, or at least mine, is to do this. Sort of try to smooth it out. Don't be afraid to use the inflate tool. It's practically one of the better tools to use. At the same time, don't be afraid to use the crease tool and the grabbing tool too, specifically like this. Then you're going to want to crease it. I want to do the same thing here, just a little bit. Alright, that's as much detail as it needs for right now. I want to move it back to about where it should go, which in this case is right about there. And we're going to want to grab it here, and we're going to want to move it down a little bit. So now we have our tongue in the right area. Alright, don't mind if your tongue is a little lumpy like that. That actually gives it character. You want it to have a little bit of definition. Now that we have the tongue, we can now add the uvula. The reason why we wanted to add the tongue first is so that we don't make the uvula too tall. Now the reason why we want to go this is because we want to be able to have full control over how it looks. So you're going to want to make sure that they're pretty round. Now a uvula does not need that many triangles or quads or whatever. Subdivision typically fills out the rest of the details that are required. If you want more details, simply just add more detail like this using the bevel tool. But be warned, if you do use the bevel tool, you will end up with this. I recommend against it because if you have them equally spaced apart, they work. And that's pretty much all that matters. So tonsils are pretty interesting, but they're also very simple. Almost deceptively so. Just kind of extrude out, scale on the y-axis, extrude out again, scale on the all-axis, add a loop cut, add a loop cut, then go to sculpt mode and just smooth it out. If you want the tonsils to be taller, simply select one more piece like this. Same idea as before. The reason why you want tonsils in the mouth is just it adds more realism to the mouth. And if you are going to do vor, you want it to look good. Here's where we're going to work on the eyes. You're going to want something like this. Now in this particular area, you don't want too many polygons around the eyes because you want the subdivision surface modifier to take care of a lot of the imperfections because it typically smooths over a lot of your wrinkles. I recommend, however, that you add a loop cut there and there because you want the mouth to have as much detail as necessary. If you want the mouth itself to look a little less blocky, simply take the corner and just pull it in. You'll notice how easy that was to give it a less blocky look. The blockiness will turn out, or will turn up, I mean, in a subdivision surface thing. So you're going to want to make sure that you have it smoothed out in a relatively decent manner before you subdivide it. Reason why is because when you smooth it out, it looks better. And look at that nose. I think I need to do something to that nose. Now don't be afraid to give more definition to areas like the chin. Okay, the eyes themselves are going to be the hardest part because if you get those wrong, the whole thing breaks. Ears we can cheat on, and a majority of the other parts we can cheat on. The eyes are among one of the few areas that in terms of visual looks is really hard to cheat on. Once you've pretty much got it to where you like it, treat it like a stuffed animal. Put the seams where they make sense. I would recommend for the hooves to select this area and simply just go up the back of the leg and loop select there and meet in the middle. Do a similar thing for the thighs, where you select around the hoof, close the loop, go up the back of the leg. But in this one, you're going to want to meet there. And you're going to want to have a secondary sort of area like this. Want to close off the leg here. If you're unsure of where to put the seams, grab a plush that you like and look at where its seams are. The ears are a little tricky to UV wrap because of their shape. So in the best case scenario, just kind of follow the base. You know what? That works. As for the tail, just kind of close it off so it's its own thing. Essentially, you'll know it's good if it looks like it could plausibly be sewn together by a stuffed toy. If you're unsure completely, however, unwrap it. Our pony is about halfway done. Model out some teeth. We got to decide on a teeth form factor because there's several official ways to do it. I'm going to go with my assumption, which is technically this. So to make the mouth bits, just make the teeth and then sculpt the inside of the mouth to match. So center the cube, add a mirror modifier, shrink it down to about the right size. Getting the size right is a little tricky, but not impossible. Bevel the edges a bit. You may be curious about these. Those are the roots. I add them for my own sanity. Try to find good pictures of horse teeth if you want to make them accurate. Huh. That'd be pretty fun to play with later. That's actually really cool. I want it. I'm too broke, but I want it. To make it better, gonna do this. Gonna bevel it. We're gonna grab the bottom. Now we got the teeth set up. We're gonna just keep going. Now, if you want to texture the teeth yourself, you can do that. I'm not going to right now. Now, unlike the top ones, the bottom ones we need to sort of cheat a little bit. Now we have to remember that the mouth has to be able to close, so we're going to basically okay, so because we personally like to have canine teeth in our horses, we'll add a canine tooth. Specifically, it'll be here. The bottom won't have that. It'll just have that small gap. This is actually a really good reference. Though I don't think I'm going to be doing the molars like this. Remember, there's a gap between where the molars are and the thing. I don't actually know how big to make the gap, so I'm going to make it something like this. Okay. So the beautiful part about this is that we can technically copy paste it twice. I personally am of the opinion this is probably enough upper teeth. Now that you got all the base mesh stuff solved and figured out, the next thing we're going to want to do is texture this. Here we go. This one looks good. We're going to use this bright red color for the hair and the rest of this for the body bits. So if we want to be quick about this, we can just do a single blob like this. And we save this as... Alright. Now we add another layer. This gets rid of the hard part of painting the whole body. Alt-R, when you're over here, will reload if you've saved it as the new thing. The base color out of the way. Let's give the eyebrows. The reason why we're doing it this way is because with the multi-resolution thing, it will actually end up working in our favor, because then it'll actually not have any seams. So that leaves us with the main skin material. Now, if you're going to do fur, you have to add a skin material underneath the fur. If you don't, it can still work, it just doesn't look as realistic. Here's what you got to do. You got to go back here, and essentially you have to select everything that is there. I'm also going to go here and add another material. I can't spell mascara, so whatever. Mascara material goes here. That way it'll look more attractive. though I think we need to look at the MLP ponies again. Mainly to see what their eyes look like. So they all have the mascara on. What has to be figured out is material. Skin, simple. Let's just go here. We'll select everything. We'll assign it to this. We need to give it a darker color with probably this color. All skin has, to a degree, some subsurface level. We'll shade smooth to make this easier. This whole part's procedural. What you want to do first is you want to use Verneuil to get that porous look. You want something that's small. Well, if we want it to look its best, let's just turn this on. So we have our skin material. Now we want to do the noise texture. We want this to have a very high level of detail and something like that. So now we want to lower the roughness. I'm going to assume that works. I'll leave those at default for right now. Alright, then you want to find out exactly how long or far it needs to go. I recommend a distance of 0.02. So we're going to go here and do the same here. Technically the same configuration, if applied correctly, can actually look good in both situations, but I recommend noise texture over the other. You basically want just enough detail that it looks plausibly realistic. If you want to add more, you can do it in layers. And Substance Painter, among other tools, are really good for that. As for something like the tongue, it's a little different. Use Meta Rig. Spawn the horse armature. Now move the bones where they need to go. You don't have to be precise about this. Just place them where they look like they'll work. When you have all the bones in place, hit Generate Rig, and it should work just fine. You must be sure, though, that all the bones have not been changed in the parental hierarchies, otherwise it'll not work. If you want to do a quick and dirty tongue material without any effort, and you want it to be accurate, use procedural textures. Verneuil and noise textures together, when mixed with a texture mask, will provide the most accurate and realistic looking tongue material that you can get. You can even use the same texture mask to apply gunk and other bits to the tongue, as well as a similar method for subsurface scattering densities. You want to add fur to your pony character, which is pretty much the last thing you should do. Make sure that you select only the faces that you want the fur at, and make sure to have a vertex group assigned to the faces that you want to have the fur at. Additionally, make sure that there is at least a small gap between where you want the fur and where you don't by at least one face. You can hand paint this later if you want, using weight paints. Once you've established that the entire amount of faces are selected, you can then apply them to the fur under the Particles tab. Here, you're going to want to add another set of particles and give it a name that you recognize. You're going to want to switch it to hair. Once you've done that, you'll have a whole bunch of hair on your pony or whatever you've made. And you're going to want to increase this number to something like 12,000, but also make it short. I usually use 0.1. You can use more, you can use less, but the more hairs you have, the more accurate it is when using interpolated hairs. If you're going to try to interpolate 1,000 hairs, you'll have some interesting problems later. Additionally, you're going to want to make sure that when you're under the timing section, that you randomize it a little bit. Slide that around, typically anywhere between 400 and 600, or 0.4 or 0.6 is good. You can even maximize it to 1 if you want. It'll be fine, although it'll look a little less uniform because it's random. Apply the interpolation. You'll see that it defaults to 10 because of performance. You might want to keep it there, but you could also increase it to 100 if you like. If your computer's fast enough, you can change the settings with a full display of interpolated hairs. After you've got the hairs to the amount that you like, change the clumping. You don't want it to be 0, but you do not want it to be too high either, because if it is too high, the end result is typically something a little, well, there's a pattern to the hair and it looks gross. You could spend time grooming it and using the clump to make it look realistic. That does take time, and it does result in a more realistic look. But grooming can take hours. I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to use randomized noise, such as the uniform, endpoint, and random. If you're curious, the size underneath each one that says size is Blender units. If it says size of 1, that is 1 meter. That's Blender's default size. If you increase the size of the uniform noise, it'll just basically make the noise pattern larger, but it does not increase detail. If you make the size smaller, it makes the noise pattern smaller, but does not decrease or increase detail. It just makes the noise pattern larger or smaller. It's basically, imagine blobs, and the bigger the number, the bigger the blob. Smaller the number, the smaller the blob. Experiment as you will with the settings, under the roughness settings. You will probably find something that you like. After you are done with that, and if you decide to use this simple method instead of grooming it, then you are done. If you want to groom it, then spend a few hours grooming it, and when you're done with that, then you'll be done. I hope this video helped you make a pony. Then I hope it maybe helped you make other 3D characters too. The methods used here can be applied to any character, and with more time into each character as you model it, the detail can go up. I was a little quick, and I cut some corners for the sake of the video, but the implications are there to allow for higher detail characters and overall better modeling, and hopefully you learn something about rigging too. Please subscribe, and if you want to, support me on Patreon. I'll put the links down in the description. It really does mean a lot when you support me on Patreon. Even though it doesn't seem like you're getting much, I'm really working hard at trying to make the system work. Thank you for watching.